So does anybody remember what the number 8 stands for? New beginnings. Yep, that's okay. You're getting there. New beginnings. That's what 8 stands for. And so guess what? For the first 7 days, Moshe, who is the high priest of the heavenly in this, as he anoints and trains Aharon, the priest for this world, and his sons, he did all these things, showing them how to do these things. And then comes the 8th day, where their ordination and their anointing is now complete as of the 7th day. Now it's the 8th day. It's the new beginnings. So they begin to take on the chores of being the priest, being the Kohanim. And they do all these different things that they were just shown how to do. And now it's their turn, bringing the different sacrifices. Remember, in Hebrew, they're called korban, not sacrifices, but korban, which means that which draws us near, or to draw close, right? All of these offerings were meant to draw us closer to God, such as we know that in the English they translate the word katat or kata as sin, but in reality it's purification. It has nothing to do with sin. So all these, none of the offerings were actually for sin. They were for purification, different types of purification, different types of drawing close to God. Okay? So none of them covered sin, as we know. And they didn't take away that which was inside us, right? They didn't change us inside us, right? And if they did all these things, then there would be no need for Yeshua. Okay? Not that these things don't have a place. These are a shadow of things to come. But as we know as well, is that God still has a priestly order here on earth, the Kohanim, the descendants of Aaron, right? And that's why Yeshua wasn't a priest here on earth, as Hebrews says. He wasn't a priest because God already had a priesthood here on earth. So he couldn't bring offerings, right? Which would have vacated his claim to being the Messiah. Just like as if he had ended the Torah, or if he had changed anything in the Torah, that would have caused him, that would have made him null and void for being the Messiah, because that's not what the Messiah was going to do. He didn't come to change anything. He came to make things better understood and to restore the house of Israel to the way it needs to go. And as we look at this too, is that as we get through here further, we see that Israel had the opportunity to go into the land of Israel to usher in the Messianic era in the desert. And we know that because they came to the spot where they sent the spies in, right? To reconnoiter the land, to see what's in there, see what it is like, and bring back parts of the fruit and stuff of the land to show, right? But instead, 10 of them gave an evil report that caused the people's hearts to sink and to lose faith, right? To become confused, to lose faith in God. But there was 2 righteous men, one from the tribe of Ephraim and one from the tribe of Judah, Joshua from the tribe of Ephraim and Caleb from the tribe of Judah, who Yeshua is descended from, right? They believed, and they believed that God would bring them through, that there was, and that's what they said. No, we can take it. We can go in right now and take it. We can take the kingdom, right? But Israel lost out on that, and God told them to turn around, head out away from here. And not only that, but he also said that the ones who believed this and caused this would make Israel wander the wilderness for 40 years, 1 year for each day they were in the land, right? 40 years, okay? And they would die. None of them would go into the land. And so we read that later on when Joshua goes in. Joshua and Caleb were the only ones who were able to go in. Even Moses wasn't able to go in, because later on we read that he caused Israel to lack faith when God said, just talk to the rock and water will come out. Instead he hid it, right? Those are pictures. That's really cool. But anyways, I always get going on those things. But the thing is that it's the 8th day, new beginnings, right? And here's the interesting thing, is that all these sacrifices, all these what we call sacrifices, as we read in Ezekiel 45, was it? Got to check it again. I think it was 45. Yeah, 45:16. Very important, because the last chapters of Ezekiel are talking about the Messianic age, the 1,000-year reign of the Messiah. But then at the end it talks about the world to come. That is the 8th day, okay, when the new covenant will take effect. Right now we have a taste of it, right? Yeshua gave us a taste of what it's going to be like to have the new covenant. The dead will live again, the blind will see, the people with sarat or skin disease will be healed, the blind will see, the lame will walk, etc. The deaf will hear. And we need to understand that there are two things going on here. But this is describing the Messianic era. When Yeshua does come, just think about right now, what we're waiting for. I know a lot of people are under the misconception and mistranslation that that there's going to be a third temple before Yeshua comes back. There's not. Never says that, okay? But it does say, and all they need, according to halakha, which is the way the law works, is for a altar to be built in the right spot. Once the altar is built there, then when you see it being built, then you know that the end is soon, that the Messianic era is at hand. And that's what the adversary, the man of perdition, the anti-Messiah, that's what he's going to stop. He's going to allow the sacrifices for a short period. And then he's going to go in and desecrate that, right? It's very important we know that and get this understanding, okay? And so when Yeshua comes, he's going to gather his people, not to go to heaven. It never says that. Where Paul gets his teaching comes from the writings of the prophets and the Torah and the writings that are back here. The Tanakh, the Old Testament, as the church calls it, but it's called the Tanakh. Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim. Torah, prophets, and writing, right? And so we see a lot of stuff, and we see this here in Ezekiel. What's going to happen is that Yeshua is the prince. He's the son of God. He's the son of the king, right? And this is what it's talking about. The prince's job is going to be to provide the sacrifices that are going to be used, in particular for Shabbat and for the new moons, and then for all the other festivals, okay? That's his job, is to bring those. He has come in his own entrance and stuff and go out his own entrance, right? And the people come in and out a different entrance. We read that. But he is going to bring those sacrifices. In the Messianic age, in the 1,000-year reign, all these offerings are going to be offered up again, these sacrifices. And the reason for it is not because it has to do with anything with sin. It's to draw us close to God. The time that this stuff comes to an end is on the 8th day. We have, as the rabbis and the sages and the prophets even talk, mankind has been given 6,000 years. The 7,000th year, the 7th day, is a time of rest, a Sabbath. And that's the time of the Messiah. And so the 7th year will be the 1,000-year reign of the Messiah. The earth will rest. At the end of the 1,000 years, as we read in Revelation, that's when the adversary is released to tempt the nations again. Okay? And the final battle takes place there between God and the adversary and those who follow him. And here's the interesting thing. We look back at Israel coming out of Egypt, right? And it says that they left with a mixed company of people who were not descendants of Abraham. They joined Israel, right? They believed in the promises of Moses. Moses, in essence, is a picture of the first Messiah, okay? And what's interesting is that God gave Israel a prophecy that said that, and it's in Deuteronomy, that I will send a man like Moses from the tribes, who is like Moses, right? Who do the things of Moses. And if you really take a look at the things that Yeshua did, he may not have come out of Egypt as a slave, but there are other things that he did, the miracles he did, the walking on water. You know what that's a picture of? Israel coming out of Egypt. What did Moses do? God used split the sea, they walked through it as if they're walking on water, right? What did Yeshua do? A storm, right? A storm represents Egypt. And he walks on the water to his people, and if they just believe him, they would be saved, right? And Rav Shaul, Rabbi Peter, Kepha, asked, if it be you, Lord, then ask me to come. And he did, and he said, come. And he walked on the water for a ways. But the things of this world always get us down. And he took his eyes off him and he sank, but there again, Yeshua stuck out his arm, saved him, brought him into the boat, and the storm quit, right?
That also kind of reminds me, the story kind of reminds me when Moshe and the people, or children of Israel are going up against Amalek, and he had his arms raised.
Amalek, yep. And his arms got tired, and so Hur and Aaron had to lift him up, and they put rocks under it, right? Yeah, another one. That's another thing right there. There's so many pictures of what Moses is doing and what Yeshua did that shows that he was the one like Moses. He was a prophet. Here's the thing. People got to understand too, when he came, he didn't come as the Messiah, although that is who he is. He came as a prophet. He lived as a prophet. He taught as a prophet, and he died as a prophet, as a Jewish rabbi. And a lot of people don't like to hear this, but Yeshua was a Pharisee too. He was of the house of the Pharisees. They would never have invited him to come and eat or even discussed anything with him if he wasn't a Pharisee. And one of the things I liked watching The Chosen, it is good to a degree, but one thing they leave out, there's no Sadducees in it. The Sadducees were his enemies. The Pharisees weren't. Although there were some in there. Yes, there were some in there that were his enemy, right? One house. And what house was that? Shammai, right? Shammai didn't like him. So in Pharisaic Judaism at that time, there was two houses, the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai. Shammai was very strict in his interpretation, and his people did not like Yeshua. Hillel, on the other hand, was not a liberal like you talk about politics, but he understood the scriptures as benefiting the people, not hindering the people. Okay? Compassion, huh?
Mercy, forgiveness, and compassion.
Okay, right. Which are the things that Yeshua taught. And the thing is that Yeshua would have gone to one of his schools, but when Joseph died, he had to come home and take care of his family. And I know a lot of people say, well, when did Joseph die? We know Joseph isn't in there, but Joseph did die. There was a uprising over a Passover after Yeshua was 12. He would have been going to one of these schools, and there was an uprising that Herod, not the King Herod that tried to kill him, but his son who took over, because the people knew. See, he was a Edomite, okay, who had killed the Hasmonean kings from the story of Hanukkah, anyways, and took over as king. But he was, in a sense, Jewish in a way of how he kept his eating and all these different things, and even not Caesar Augustus.
Yes, it would have been Nero.
No, not Nero. That's later. Caesar, the one Et tu, Brute.
You're talking of
Caesar.
yes, Gaius Caesar, or just
the one who became the first Caesar. Yeah, why can't I think of his name? Anyways, he said of King Herod, Julius Caesar. There we go. Julius Caesar. He said of Herod that it was safer for a pig in the court of Herod than for one of his sons, because he knew he wouldn't kill him because they don't eat pig, right? They don't eat pig, but his sons were a threat to him. And yes, he did have his sons killed up until the time he died, and then the next Herod took his place, and that's the one that we see a lot about in here, Herod Antipas. But anyways, as we look at this, The thing is like I said, I like watching it. It's got some good stuff. But the thing is, Yeshua wouldn't have gone into a synagogue like they showed in season 2 and caused a commotion. He would have talked to him after service, stuff like that, about these different things. When he went to the synagogue in Nazareth, I thought it was really neat how he did those things. We don't know what exactly was all said. We know that he would have read the entire portion of the Haftorah from Isaiah, but we always just read the small portion that they write down, right? But he would have read the whole chapter, or what we understand as the chapter of the Isaiah. Was it 64? 64 was it? I think so. We're proclaiming freedom, right? He would have read the whole thing, but he focused on just a couple of the verses, and that's why they put it in here. They just put down what he focused on and then said to them. And when we look at this stuff, we see that he is the prince that will be in the Messianic age. He will be the one to provide the offerings for God, and even himself, where it says he will prostrate himself before God, right? It says all these different things about him, and then the Cohen. So there's a priesthood. There's a priesthood right now that is working in Israel. The priesthood is going, but they're not active in the temple because there's no temple right now. They actually have a school for the Kohanim, for the priests, and they go through, they actually, like right now, they'll be going through the land of Israel with not a real altar and stuff, and they do this at a lot of the festivals to demonstrate what it would be like to offer the sacrifices, how to bring them, how to do it, even like the Passover, huh? More of a teaching, right? To just show the people. Yeah. And one of the things too that we do learn about Passover, which is coming up on the evening of the 22nd, 23rd of this month, is that it says God tells Israel to roast it over fire, right? And eat it in haste. But that's when they're in Egypt, right? Later on, it's we just roast it. We get to recline and eat. But how did they roast it? A lot of people think it's a spit hanging over the fire, like we see Southwest spit, right? One of those types. It's not. The Midrash, or the Mishnah and the Talmud, which are the traditions that are passed down on how these things worked, says that after it was killed and there's blood taken by the priest, the skin would be taken off it, which would be given to the priest, and then you would take it home. And then you would prepare it to be roasted. And what they would do is take a long pole, usually of olive wood, and stick it from the butt end up to the head and hold its head up, and they would stick it down like this. And then they would take a cross piece to open the chest up as wide as it could. And then they would take the entrails and wrap it around its head, known as the crown sacrifice. Okay? And that's how they would roast it. And you see a picture, right? And so they were doing this as a shadow, not even realizing what was going to happen, right? So God always gives hints, right? And that's the hint too with the Gentiles. The Gentiles who came out of Egypt with Israel, had a place. All they had to do is believe the message Moses brought, and they could be part of Israel. And that's the same thing that Yeshua said. Yeshua, when he went to Israel, he went to Israel. He even says that my time isn't for the Gentiles right now. Just go to the house of Israel, the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Go to them, right? It's not till after when he says to the Gentiles, right? And Peter also goes to the Gentiles. But it's not till after his death. And he goes, and he says this in the last chapter of Matthew, go into all the earth, preaching the good news, the Besorah. And it's not the good news, I mean, part of it is that he's from the dead. He died for our sins, rose from the dead. But what is the good news? The good news has been preached since the time of Abraham. Anybody know what that is?
Repent for the kingdom of heaven is at hand.
Exactly. Repent, for the kingdom of God is at hand. It's here, it's coming. And that's the gospel message that people need to be ready for. And how do we get ready? we believe in God's promises. And in this sense, just as the children of Israel and those people from the other nations believed the word of Moses, we need to believe also in the word of Yeshua. The words of Yeshua are no different than what's written here. They're the same, one and the same. He is the word of God, as it says in John chapter 1. But not only is he the word, it says that he is also wisdom, as we learned back in Proverbs chapter 8. Okay. Well, the Greek term is logos, word, yep, written. And in essence, when we look at that, the word Torah and word can be synonymous to each other. So Yeshua is the living Torah. Okay? It lives. It doesn't change. It lives. It lives through him. And that's why he says in Matthew chapter 5, verses 16 through 20, which a lot of people kind of miss out on, is, let me get there real quick. Don't think that I have come to abolish the Torah or the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to complete. Now, a lot of people, when they read this in the English, the word complete in modern day English means to end, means to be done with. But in Judaism, this is what we call a Hebrewism. And Yeshua is using this at that time. It's what was taught then, is that the rabbis taught and the sages taught that if you taught the Torah incorrectly, then you had abolished it, put an end to it. It was no good, right? But if you had taught it correctly, then you had completed it in the essence that it was written in. Not ended it, but fulfilled it, okay? And that's what Yeshua is telling us. He came not to teach incorrectly. Then the others are smaller. There's extra teaching in there that Moses put in there that in order to understand it, you have to study it out. And there's other things too that we look for that are what we call strokes, okay? Like a good one is when Esau goes to kiss his brother Jacob, there's 6 dots over his name, okay? Or over the word kiss.
Doesn't the Midrash say that
He was going to bite him. He was going to harm him. That's what it says. That he was going to harm him, but God turned his heart. And they hugged instead, right? But unless you understand it, you don't know that. You don't see that. Those are what we understand as mysteries, right? And there's so many other things too that we can see. So when when you have a bigger letter than the other letters, that means that there is more to this. It's more up to the story than what's there. But if it's a little letter, then it means it's lacking something, okay? There's something missing from this, and it goes on to teach it. But here's the other thing that I really want to bring out too, is that God says for Israel, be holy as I am holy, okay? And I know some of you have heard this before, but this is awesome teaching because it's truth. In Hebrew, kadosh for Hebrew is 4 letters, okay? Kaf, Dalet, Vav, Shin, kadosh. And when God says, be holy to us, it's missing the Vav, which means it's lacking, okay? And we see that in the Torah. It's missing the Vav, so it's not complete, okay? But when God says, as I am holy, it has all 4 letters, meaning it's full, it's complete, okay? So our holiness isn't complete. So our holiness isn't complete, but how can we be full like God, right? Which is interesting is that the Hebrew letters, not only are they letters for alphabet, they're also numbers, they're also musical notes, but also they're pictures like hieroglyphs. And the Vav represents a nail, something that brings something together, holds fast, right? What was Yeshua hung on the cross with? Nails, right? So, our holiness, which is lacking, but God's is full, God sends his son, his Messiah, to become that Vav for that nail, to bring something together, to make our holiness complete, make it full in him, right? That's the message. That's the message that Yeshua brought, that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. All we have to do is believe in his promises, just as Israel believed in the promises of Moses. We need to believe in the promises of Yeshua. We need to accept him. And when we accept him, whether we're a Jew or Gentile, we become part of the kingdom of Israel. The Jews are already part of the kingdom of Israel, but just as we were talking about last week, Rav Shaul talks about for the Gentiles that are being grafted in, the wild branch, don't think of yourselves as better than the root, right? The root is Israel, okay? And just as some of the original branches were cut off to make room for you, he says if you begin to lack faith and you aren't producing what you're supposed to, you'll be cut off too. But God leaves another miracle. Is those branches that were cut off, if they begin to produce fruit, their faith comes back, then God will take and put them back in, regraft them back in, right? But Rav Shaul says, for the Gentiles, don't think of yourself as being the root. You're not. Israel is the root, and you're being fed from Israel. That's why we have the Bible. It's about Israel. It's about us joining Israel, not as Jews. God said as Jews and Gentiles together, right? As he says too in one of the prophets, that it's to become one new man. Jews and Gentiles, one new man. Which we have a song too. We do that too. Jew and Gentile, sung by Lamb, which is a Messianic group. And so when we believe the promises and we start to understand this stuff, and we see how deeply Yeshua was Jewish, how deeply his disciples were Jewish, and they never quit being Jewish, right? But they talked about a great falling away, okay? And the falling away of the truth, falling away from Israel, came to the church. And sorry to say, the modern church, the Catholic Church, with the Protestant churches, have all come from that branch, okay? And that's why we're starting to see the things going on in the churches today. People falling away, people doing things they know they shouldn't do, getting the respect of people that we shouldn't be getting the respect of, people who are vile and evil, you know. And not all churches are like that. I mean, there's some good churches, and I know that. But we have to look at it. We have to dig. God has placed this stuff for us to dig, not reject. That's one of the things I like about the complete Jewish Bible and the study Bible, is that, you know, most Bibles, when you come to it, like the end of Chronicles, there's usually a page in there that says New Testament, right? Well, here's Chronicles at the end, and then begins the book of Matthew. It's now separating. Why? Because it's one book. It was never meant to be separated. It's all one book. It all goes together, all flows together. And the thing is that all these books that are in the, what we call the New Testament, I call the Renewed Covenant, because that's what it is, were written to Jewish people, but also with Gentiles in mind as well. There's a book out that the apostles wrote a long time ago called the Didache, and it's for the Gentiles. What their obligation is, and this was written by the apostles, what their obligation is to be part of the faith of Israel. We know that James, the brother of Yeshua, Yaakov the righteous, Yaakov HaTzadik, James the righteous, who was the leader of the church at that time, the question was brought for him, what do we do about the Gentiles who are joining? And he said, I'm not going to add on to them the things that have been added to us, but we're going to start them out with no eating of things sacrificed to idols, no blood, nothing strangled or incorrectly killed as kosher, right? And no fornication. And fornication, a lot of people are mixed up on fornication. It does have to do with sex and stuff, but it has to do with in the worship of an idol, okay? That's the difference. A lot of people say that fornication is premarital sex stuff. No, it has to do with the worship of an idol, using sex in the worship of an idol. That's why temples had temple prostitutes, and people would pay the temple to do this as part of their worship, okay? That's why we see also in here that Israel, when Balaam and Balak sent in he couldn't curse them, so he said, Balaam said, well, if you send your daughters and stuff in there and stuff like that, Baal Peor was what it is, and they able to cause the men to begin to worship, and God took his hand, started to take his hand off there, but because of the grandson of Aaron, he went in, stopped it, and God stopped the curse, that the judgment that was going, because he had a pure heart for God. And then God, not only that, but he promised Phinehas that that the priesthood would belong to him forever, the earthly priesthood. Okay, so his descendants, which are still descendants of Aaron, still have the priesthood even today. But as we go through this, remember that, I mean, there's so much more we could get into about this, but just as the people of Israel and the Gentiles that were in Egypt believed Moses, joined themselves to Israel, right? That's what happened. We don't hear about them anymore because they were joined to Israel, whatever tribe they lived in. And then if we look in Ezekiel again, it talks about that in that day that we are no longer to call the foreigners foreigners, but to be called homeborn, Sabra, to be called homeborn. Yes.
So was Caleb a Gentile because wasn't he a Kenite or Kenzanite?
No, he was a Judite. He was from Judah.
Okay.
Yep.
I thought his dad was. I know he represented the tribe of Judah, but I thought his dad was a Kenzanite. I think.
I don't know. I have to look into that, but I know he was from the tribe of Judah because that's what it says. And I do believe his dad was a leader of the tribe of Judah too. But I mean, I'm pretty sure he's of the tribe of Judah. But it's something that could be looked at. I know that Moses' father-in-law was part of the Kenites, or the I'm trying to remember, Jethro. Yeah. So, and they did actually go with Israel. They became part of Israel too, which is really cool too. But in Ezekiel it says, no longer to be called foreigners, but homeborn, Sabra. And they are to be given an inheritance in the tribe that they live in. No more. Now they don't have to become Jewish, right? That's not what we're talking about. Because otherwise the promise God said about Jews and Gentiles wouldn't be fulfilled. God wants Jews to, that's what Paul says, stay Jewish if you're Jewish, stay Gentile if you are, but worship God. And that's where we go to in Acts chapter 10, real quick here and I'll finish up. A lot of people don't finish this, and they always think it's about food, and that's the one reason I want to bring it up. It's about Cornelius, right? Cornelius, who was a Roman officer in the army, was a devout man, a God-fearer. Okay, in Israel there were two types of people. There were the Jews and the God-fearers, and the Gentiles, I should say too, those who didn't fear God, right? But the two believers were Gentiles who didn't convert, but God feared. They practiced the Torah as best they could, right? But they were still considered a Gentile, okay? And then there was the Jewish people that were religious and stuff like that. And that's what he is. He's a God-fearer, as was his whole household. He gave generously to help the Jewish poor and prayed regularly to God. One afternoon around 3 o'clock, he saw clearly in a vision an angel of God coming in and saying to him, Cornelius. Cornelius stared at the angel, terrified. What is it, sir? He asked. Your prayers, replied the angel, and your acts of charity have gone up into God's presence, so that he has you on his mind. Now send some men to Yaffo to bring back a man named Shimon, also called Kepha. He's staying with Shimon the leather tanner, who has a house by the sea. As the angel that had spoken to him went away, Cornelius called two of his household slaves. Okay, so we know the story. He sends those two servants to get Peter, right? And while Peter is there, they go to Peter. The next day about noon, while they were still on their way and approaching the city, Kepha went up onto the roof of the house to pray. He began to feel hungry and wanted something to eat. But while they were preparing the meal, he fell into a trance in which he saw heaven opened and something that looked like a large sheet being lowered to the ground by its four corners. In it were all kinds of four-footed animals, crawling creatures, and wild birds. Then a voice came to him, Get up, Kepha, slaughter and eat. But Kepha said, "No, sir, absolutely not. I have never eaten food that was unclean or treif." The voice spoke to him a second time. "Stop treating as unclean what God has made clean." This happened 3 times, and then the sheet was immediately taken back up into heaven. And Kepha was still puzzling over this meaning of the vision he had seen when the men Cornelius had sent, having inquired for Shimon's house, stood at the gate and called out to ask if Shimon, known as Kepha, was staying there. While Kepha's mind was still on the vision, the Spirit said, "3 men are looking for you. Get up, go downstairs, and have no misgiving about going with them, because I myself have sent them." Okay? So he goes down, right? And they introduce themselves. They say who he is and who has sent them, right? The next day, he got up and went with them, accompanied by some of the brothers from Jaffa, and he arrived at Caesarea the day after that. Cornelius was expecting them. He had already called together his relatives and close friends. As Kepha entered the house, Cornelius met him and fell prostrate at his feet. But Kepha pulled him up to his feet and said, "Stand up, I myself am just a man." As he talked with him, Kepha went inside and found many people gathered. He said to them, "You are well aware that for a man who is a Jew to have close association with someone who belongs to another people, or to come and visit him, is something that just isn't done. But," and here's the but God has shown me not to call any person common or unclean. So when I was summoned, I came without raising any question. Tell me then, why did you send for me?" Right? They always stop at this other thing about the sheet and the food, right? And they say, God said we can do everything. No, the food was just a representation of something that God was trying to instill in Peter, right? Had nothing to do with the animals. Even Yeshua said, there's a verse that says, and they're talking about hand washing, and that some of the Pharisees are kind of curious as to why his disciples, his Talmudim, are not washing their hands like the elders say you're supposed to. Well, there's nothing wrong with what the Pharisees were doing, because what they were trying to do is emulate the priests, and that the priests have to wash their hands and feet before they can do any of the offerings and stuff, before they eat, before any of these things. And during the time of Babylon, the households, and even today still, the households are the primary place for service, okay? And so the father, the head of the household, is like the high priest. And so in order to remain pure as best they could, the washing of hands and stuff before eating was a must. And that's where it came from. It's not wrong. There's nothing wrong with it. I mean, we should wash our hands before. We would never know what we've been touching, right? Sometimes we do know, but anyways. The thing is that Yeshua says, when they question him, he says, nothing that goes into the mouth will defile you. It's what comes out of the heart, right? And then it goes on to say, which was actually added to the Greek many years later, says, thus he declared all foods clean. Then you have to go back and say, okay, at that time, what did Jews consider food, right? They didn't consider the stuff that we just read in Leviticus 11 as food. They would never consider that. And that's the same thing we see with Peter. He doesn't consider food. No, I'm not going to do that. But God takes that and he uses that to say, whom he has declared clean, don't reject, right? So he's calling the Gentiles, the God-fearers, right? The ones who believe in the promises of Moses and of Israel, who have joined themselves to Israel with not converting, but in spirit to Israel, okay? And that's what we see there. And the other thing is, too, that we need to understand, too, is that just because something made you unclean did not mean that you sinned. That's another misnomer that we get from the sacrifices, right? Calling some of these things sin offerings. They're purification offerings. Like a woman in her monthly cycle, when she's done with it, she is to go to a mikvah, a ritual bath. Not to wash up with soap and water. That's something that she would probably do before she went there. But for spiritual purification, so that she can go into the temple. If you weren't pure, if you didn't go through these things, you weren't allowed to enter the temple. Even God put a rule in that if you were caught unclean in the temple, you were to be killed on the spot. God doesn't want death in his temple. The only thing he wants are the sacrifices. That's different. But that's why people with sarat or skin disease or a type of leprosy weren't allowed in the cities, but also especially not allowed in the temple. The tearing of clothing in mourning that they would have done, Moses told them, don't do that because it's a sign of death. We don't do that here. Okay? Not in the presence of God. Why? Because God is life. God is holy. He's life. And death does not belong there because it's unnatural. Okay? Death is unnatural. It's natural for this world right now. Right? But it's actually unnatural. And that's, just finishing up here real quick too, is that that's what the world to come is, the world after. The 8th day that we will enter in after the 1,000-year reign is new beginnings, a new heaven, a new earth. But actually the words there in the Greek are renewed, not brand new, renewed. So the earth and heaven are going to be here, but they're going to be renewed, remade in the image that God originally intended them for. Okay? And that's when the new covenant that we understand will kick in, where it says in Jeremiah that in that time, that new covenant, no one will have to teach his brother about God because everybody's going to know. You're not going to have it. Everybody's going to know. That isn't here right now. We have a taste of it. And we can still walk in some of those promises that are there. Even the apostles did. You know, they had a mighty ministry of going out, people being healed, people were raising from the dead. And we don't see that very much here because to them it was given, and to us, some of us have been given that sometimes too. But at that time, all that stuff will be given to us. Life, there won't be no death, there won't be no sorrow. Our minds will be made clear. And not only that, but see, in this life right now we have here, and even going through the 1,000-year reign, our genetic structure allows a nature of sin. Right? It says that in that time that God will change us in the twinkling of an eye. What's he changing? He's changing our genetic structure, taking out that natural sin and putting his Torah in our hearts and in our minds so that it will never be natural for us to sin. It would be supernatural. It would be to completely reject God, but we won't because it's now part of us. And if it's part of us, we can't go against it. You see? That's the promises of God. I'm in the middle of trying to write a book about the difference between the 1,000-year reign and the world to come, the 8th day. 8th day means renewed, born again even. Okay? And that's what we got to look at. So when we're looking at this stuff, the sacrifices and stuff, the 8th day, they're beginning to do the service that they were being trained for, 7 days. And the 8th day, right, then they take over. God's 8th day. That's why Sukkot has 8 days in it, not 7, right? Because 7 days are for the nations. The 70 oxen that are slaughtered in those 7 days are for the nations. But on the 8th day, it says 1 oxen. And all is one people on the 8th day. No separation. That's the promise. That's the good news that Yeshua brought to us. His kingdom is coming. His kingdom of the 1,000-year reign. We're going to have peace like we don't know, but it's going to be a lot like what we have here. It's not going to be much of a change other than it's going to be peaceful. Jobs aren't going to be stressful. It's going to be just an awesome time of resting. The adversary is not going to be there to tempt us and to try and drag us off. But we do know at the end of that 1,000 years, he's released. And by amazement on myself, he's going to be able to take people, trick them, bring them with him in the final battle to go against God. And we see that in Israel too. Like I said, those that went into the land, they could have gone into the Messianic kingdom, but instead they rejected God's promises and they ended up wandering the desert for 40 years, right?
Honestly, with artificial intelligence, that I think is going to be the biggest tool.
Yeah, I agree. And that's the other thing too, just real quick too, is that when Yeshua was here, if Israel had repented and turned from their ways, got rid of their baseless hatred towards each other and loved each other and loved God, Yeshua could have ushered then, at that time, the Messianic era. at that time. But because they rejected each other, they fought against each other. They rejected his message. Not all of them, many of them though, rejected his message, and that's why he gave the prophecy that the time's coming when Jerusalem's going to be surrounded. Because you've rejected, not rejected him necessarily, but rejected the promises that God made to them, and that he, as it says about the prophecy of the one like Moses, that listen to him, because if you don't, he'll become a rock that will crush you. Okay? Yeah, and that's what we see happen. They could have gone in, but again, just like before the wilderness, they rejected, and now we had to go through this time period. But the time is short now. Things are working out that they're going to probably be building the altar. Don't know when, but it's definitely working up to that point. Another thing is you got to read the story of Joseph, and we see that Israel is defending Yeshua now as a Jew, something that was unheard of before, all because of October 7th. The Palestinians and the Arabs have, and we've got churches now saying the same thing, that Jesus was a Palestinian, okay, and or a Palestinian refugee. And Israel, many famous rabbis who would not want anything to do with Jesus and stuff are coming out saying, hey, he was our guy. He was a Jewish rabbi. I mean, it's amazing. And those times are coming. Just like when Joseph revealed himself to his brothers, when Judah defended his little brother Benjamin, then Joseph knew that they had repented, and then he revealed himself. And that's coming. Israel's starting to do that. We're going to see that happen. And it's going to be awesome. But,
Well, it doesn't work if you start doing it.
yeah,
That was thinking.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
We're all,
Yeah. But we're going to see it happening. It's going to be awesome. But it's going to come with persecution. And we need to be ready for that. Understand that. I mean, we are starting to feel that. And not just from people who don't believe, but there are churches out there that are really rejecting Israel and stuff like that. And that's just part of that. Even our country, look at our president has turned on Israel. And the thing is, prophecy says in Revelation and Daniel and stuff, it talks about the nations of the world gathering against Israel. You know, and I mean, we need to pray for our country, because I love our country, its meanings, its founding, and I hate to see it go that way, and I don't want to see it go that way. And so that's why we need to pray for our youth, because they're being led astray by what you call a Pied Piper from the adversary, preaching, do whatever you want. If it feels good, do it. Don't let anybody judge you about if you want to do this or believe that. And a lot of it's dirt wrong. It leads them away from God and not to God. Yeshua, in essence, was a picture of a korban, drawing people close. That's what his job was to do, drawing us close to God. He is the high priest in heaven, right? We know that. So he brings our prayers that are like incense to God, right? All right, so as we go this week, just think about these things. The promise of the 8th day. Let's make sure we're part of that, you know? Make sure that we're living our lives as a witness to other people. You know, I'm not saying go out to the corner and yell and stuff like that. That's not what God wants. He wants us to live a life that is reminiscent of his righteousness, the best we can. We're going to be perfect, but just do the best we can. He knows our hearts. Right? He knows what's in our hearts. He knows our love for him or our disdain for him. And people are going to ask you. They see a difference in you. They're noting what's real and what's not. And we see so many fake people. So let's be real people of God, right? Just as Yeshua said, they will know us by our love one for another. But that means he's not just talking about those who believe in him, he's talking about those around us, even those that don't necessarily agree with us, right? So, all right. Bow your heads for the priestly blessing. Our God and God of our fathers, bless us with the threefold blessing in the Torah written by the hand of Moses, your servant, and pronounced by Aaron and his sons the priests, your holy people, as it is said. May the Lord bless you and protect you. May it be your will. May the Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. May it be your will. May the Lord turn his face toward you and grant you peace. May it be your will. Yevarecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'chunecha. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha. Shalom. Have a good rest of Shabbat and a good week. Our Torah Club study Tuesday night at 7. Wednesday night our Wednesday night study at 7. And then Friday we've got Sally Klein O'Connor here for music ministry Friday night, 6 to 7:30. 6 to 7:30, yeah. And then we'll be having a meal afterwards and ushering in Shabbat, separating the Shabbat from the regular work week as we rest, right? So that's 6 to 7:30. She'll be here as a potluck, reminding people out here too. And it's fine to come a little bit early to fellowship and stuff beforehand to meet her. She'll have stuff, several of her CDs and stuff that she's put out over the years. It should be in the paper tomorrow in the announcements. Today, it should be in the paper and Wednesday's paper and the advertiser. What do they call that over here? Is it advertiser? Okay. I know in Hibbing it was something else, I don't remember. But, okay. But yeah. So look for that. Invite people. I don't know how many people are going to be here, but even prayerfully it's a good day, because if we have to open up the garage and set chairs and stuff out there, we'll do that too. You know. But anyways, I just want everybody to go in peace and everything. So Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shalom. Shabbat, Shalom. Shabbat, Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shalom. Shabbat, Shalom. Shabbat, Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shalom. Good Shabbos. No, not Manischewitz. I know. And if you have some questions too,